I came back from a business trip to my parents' house, but the locks were changed. We gave your room to your cousin, Dad shouted, so I left. But when he stole their money. The business trip had been long and tiring, and frankly, I was glad to be going home. Well, not home only to my parents' house, where I had been living for the past few months. But it was still familiar. I wasn't excited to see them, but after 2 weeks away, I couldn't deny that a tiny part of me was a little relieved to be back. Even if I tried to tell myself otherwise. I pulled into the driveway and immediately noticed that something felt wrong. My dad's car was parked in a different spot, and there were unfamiliar shoes on the porch. For a second, I wondered if they had company. That would be annoying, but never mind. I'd just go to my room and relax. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, walked up the steps, and slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I frowned and tried again, jiggling it a little. Nothing. For a second, I thought maybe they had installed one of those fancy electronic locks while I was gone. Maybe my dad had forgotten to give me the code. That was something he would do. I knocked. Then I rang the doorbell. No answer. I waited, shifting my weight, already annoyed. I pulled out my phone to call her, but before I could dial, I heard movement upstairs. I looked up. My mom stepped onto the second-floor balcony and leaned over the railing, looking down at me like I was some random salesman she didn't want to deal with. "We gave your room to your cousin," she called out like it was the most normal thing in the world. I squinted at her, trying to process the words. "What?" "He needed a place to stay," she said. "And he's paying $1,500 a month in rent. Sorry we didn't tell you. We just didn't have time for you." I stood there staring at her, my mind struggling to put the pieces together. They gave away my room. They changed the locks. They didn't even tell me. I let out a short laugh, half in disbelief. "Are you serious? Brian, don't make a big deal out of this," she said, as if I was the one being ridiculous. "We needed the money and he really needed a place to stay. It worked out for everyone." "Everyone? You think it worked out for me? Look, you'll get your stuff later," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "He's not alone. He's with his girlfriend." Another time. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. They had actually kicked me out. I took a step back and looked at the house I had grown up in. The place they had practically begged me to move back to after I sold my apartment. "Remember your childhood?" they had said. Yes. I remembered. I stared at my mother for another second, waiting for her to say something else. Anything that would make this less crazy. Nothing. I laughed again. Not because it was funny, but because it was so stupid that I didn't know how else to react. "All right," I muttered under my breath. "All right." I turned and walked back to my car. I could have gone to a friend's house, but I didn't want to explain why I suddenly had nowhere to go. So I drove to the nearest hotel, checked in, and sat on the bed staring at the ceiling. Somehow I still felt surprised. And that was the stupidest thing of all. I spent the rest of the night in the hotel, alternating between being angry and just numb. It wasn't even the fact that they threw me out. It was the way they did it, like I was some stranger who had overstayed his welcome. Like I was just an inconvenience they forgot to mention before replacing me with my cousin. I wasn't close to him. I never had been. We grew up together, but I never liked him. He was the kind of guy who always found an angle, always looking for the easiest way to get ahead, even if it meant screwing people over. The fact that he, of all people, was now in my old room, paying my parents for it like they were some kind of landlords, made my skin crawl. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. He answered after a few rings. "Yeah?" I let the silence linger for a second. "What's going on?" "Not my problem," he said, sounding completely unconcerned. "I made a deal with them. It's their house." I exhaled sharply and gripped the phone tighter. "They knew I lived there." "Yeah, so? They told me you weren't coming back." My jaw clenched. I was on a business trip. I live here. I work here. Did you really think I was gone forever? He didn't answer right away. Then, look, man, I don't know what to tell you. You should take it up with them. I hung up. There was no point talking to him. He wouldn't give a shit. I could have called my parents again, but what would that change? They had made their decision. They didn't even have the decency to warn me. I ran my hand over my face, feeling exhausted. Fine. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, then I would return the favor. I wasn't going to beg to stay in my own parents' house. For the next few days, I focused on work. I extended my stay at the hotel and pretended it wasn't a big deal. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself it was probably for the best. Then, 2 weeks later, my father called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. The second I answered, his voice came through, tense and desperate. Brian, you need to come over. I raised an eyebrow, already irritated. Why? He robbed us. I sat up straighter. What? Your cousin? He stole everything. $40,000. He took the money out of the safe and disappeared. I blinked. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. 40,000? Yes. I don't know what to do. He's not answering his phone, he just took off in the middle of the night. I started to laugh. I couldn't help it. I had to catch my breath. You left 40 grand in cash sitting around? And I laughed again. You should have put it in a visible place. Maybe left a neon sign. This isn't funny, Brian, my dad snapped. We have to find it. I shook my head, still grinning. Unbelievable. They kicked me out because of him. And now he was robbing them blind. I leaned back against the hotel bed, still grinning, as my father continued to ramble on about how they didn't know what to do. The irony of the situation was so perfect it almost felt staged. You really left 40 grand lying around? I asked again, still trying to wrap my head around it. It was in the book, he snapped, as if that explained everything. The book. I knew exactly what he meant. My parents had this old hardcover dictionary in their room with the middle cut out, stuffed with cash like a cartoon safe. They used to joke about it when I was younger, saying it was their rainy day fund, in case something happened. Well, something did happen. And let me guess, I said, rubbing my temples. You didn't bother to check his background before you let him move in? Didn't think to, I don't know, not give him full access to everything? Brian, this isn't the time for this. My dad snapped. We need to find him. Can you help or not? I sighed and shook my head. Why are you calling me? Call the police. We did, he said. They told us to wait. Of course they did. The cops weren't going to launch a citywide manhunt over a family dispute. As far as they were concerned, this was just another case of bad choices, bad consequences. So what do you want from me? You know people, he said. Serious people. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, now you need me? Brian Dash. I sighed. Fine. I'll be there in 20. I pulled up to the house, and the moment I stepped inside, the place felt different. Like the energy had shifted. My mom was pacing the living room, clutching her cell phone like it held the answers to all her problems. My dad was at the dining room table, flipping through the empty book like maybe the money would magically reappear if he just looked hard enough. They both looked up as I walked in. He's not answering his phone, my mom said right away. I've tried his friends, his girlfriend, even his old job, nothing. I snorted. Yeah, because he's gone. He's not sitting around waiting for you to track him down. My dad ran his hand over his face. We don't understand why he would do that. I stared at him. Are you serious? They actually looked confused. Like this was some big mystery. You barely know him, I said. You just assumed he was trustworthy because he's family? He needed a place to stay. My mother insisted. And you needed money. I shot back. You were so excited about the extra $1,500 a month that you didn't think about who you were letting into your house. Silence. I exhaled and shook my head. Whatever. Here's what we'll do. I pulled out my phone and called someone who actually knew how to find people. His name was Nate, and he owed me a favor. He didn't ask any questions, just told me to send over everything I had on my cousin's phone number, social media, everything. I sent what little I knew, then sat back and waited. 2 hours later, Nate called me back. Got a lead, he said. He's still in town. Probably thinks you guys aren't going after him. I'll text you the address. I grinned. Appreciate it. I hung up and looked at my parents. Get in the car. We're going to find him. They hesitated, like they hadn't really thought that far ahead. My mom shifted nervously. Shouldn't we just let the police handle this? I gave her a look. You think he's going to wait for them? If you want your money back, we have to go now. My dad nodded and grabbed his keys. Let's go. I smiled to myself. This was going to be interesting. The drive to the address Nate had sent was dead silent. My dad gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white, and my mom just kept looking out the window like she wanted to disappear. I, on the other hand, was calm. Maybe even a little amused. They had kicked me out like I was nothing, replaced me with him, and now here we were, hunting him down like some low-rent bounty hunter. Poetic. We pulled up to a rundown apartment complex on the edge of town. The kind of place where porch lights flickered and the parking lot was full of dented sedans. It made sense. My cousin was always good at looking like he had money without actually having any. Nate was already there, leaning against his car, looking bored. He's inside, he said as we got out. 3rd floor, apartment 3C. Anyone with him? I asked. Saw him and his girl come in an hour ago. No movement since. My dad started for the door, but I put a hand on his shoulder. You got a plan here, or are you just going to barge in and hope he hands over 40 grand? He hesitated. That's what I thought. I turned to Nate. You got people coming? He nodded. Just as backup. But this is your family mess, not mine. Fair enough. I looked at my parents. Stay here. They didn't argue. I took the stairs 2 at a time, heart steady, mind clear. I wasn't nervous. I had dealt with worse people than my cousin. I reached 3C and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Footsteps. Then his voice, muffled through the door. Who is it? Open up. Silence. Then, Brian? Yes. Open the door. More silence. I could practically hear the gears turning inside his head. Finally, the lock clicked, and the door opened just enough for me to see his face. He looked rough. Bags under his eyes, nervous energy all over him. Like he knew his little payday was about to run out. What do you want? He asked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside before he could stop me. His girlfriend was on the couch, scrolling through her phone like none of this mattered to her. There were shopping bags everywhere, clothes, electronics, luxury crap he definitely didn't need. I looked at him. You know why I'm here. He crossed his arms, trying to act tough. I don't know what you're talking about. I grinned. Really? Then I pulled out my phone, opened a file, and hit play. The security footage. See, before I left on my trip, I installed a hidden camera in my parents' house. Not for security, more because I never really trusted them or anyone who came through. And right now, that little investment was paying off big time. The video showed my cousin sneaking into my parents' room in the middle of the night, rifling through the hidden book, and stuffing stacks of cash into his pocket. Clear as day. He watched the footage, his face turning pale. His girlfriend glanced over, raised an eyebrow, then went back to her phone as if this was just another Tuesday for her. Not a good look, huh? I said. He swallowed. It's not. I cut him off. You have 2 options. 1, you give back what's left of the money right now, and maybe my parents won't push this any further. He shifted, looking around the apartment as if the walls would give him an answer. And 2? I smiled. We'll call the cops and some people who won't be nearly as polite as me. His girlfriend scoffed. You think you're some kind of gangster or something? I ignored her. I wasn't here for her. He licked his lips. He was scared. He should be. Finally, he sighed and headed for the bedroom. Fine. Just wait here. I crossed my arms and waited. One way or another, this was going to end tonight. I stood in the middle of the apartment, arms crossed, watching as my cousin disappeared into the bedroom. His girlfriend still hadn't looked up from her phone. She didn't seem the least bit worried, which told me one of two things: either she was used to this kind of situation, or she thought I was bluffing. A minute passed. Then 2. He was stalling. Probably in there trying to figure out if he could lie his way out of this, or if he had already spent so much of the money that returning it wouldn't even matter. I turned to his girlfriend. How much did he tell you he had? She glanced at me, looking bored. Huh! The money, I said. How much did he say he had? She smirked. Enough. That told me everything I needed to know. I walked over to the bedroom door and pushed it open. My cousin was inside, kneeling in front of an open suitcase. He jumped when he saw me. Dude, I'm getting it. I looked down. The suitcase was mostly full, stacks of cash piled on top of clothes and random junk. But it wasn't 40 grand. I knew that just by looking. Where's the rest? I asked. He hesitated. My patience ran out. I grabbed the collar of his shirt and pulled him to his feet. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. His hands shot up. Okay. Some of it's gone, alright? I had to pay off a few things. Bullshit. It's true. His eyes darted to the side. Rent, some debts. I pushed him back down. How much is left? He swallowed. Maybe 25. Where? He hesitated again, so I yanked the suitcase off the ground and opened the side pockets. Tucked inside was another 5 grand in neat stacks. That brought it to about 30. I turned to him. Last chance. Where's the rest? He bit his lip, like he was weighing his options. I pulled out my phone. Alright. Guess we'll have to do this the other way. Wait. He held up his hands. Okay. It's in my car. Glove compartment. I kept my eyes on him. If I check and you're lying, we're done talking. He nodded quickly. I swear. I stepped back. Let's go. Outside, my parents were still by the car. My mom wringing her hands like this was so stressful for her. Nate was off to the side, watching everything unfold. When my cousin and I stepped out, my dad straightened. Well, he's got most of it, I said. Some is in his car. My cousin hurried over to the beat-up Honda parked a few spots away and unlocked the door. He opened the glove compartment and pulled out another stack of cash, probably another 5 grand. That brought us to 35. I stared at him. Still short. His face went pale. Dude, I swear that's it. I didn't believe him. But I also knew we weren't going to get the full amount back no matter what I did. He had already burned through some of it. That was obvious. I turned to my dad. Take the money and let's go. My dad grabbed the stacks from him, stuffing them into a plastic bag like he was handling stolen goods. Which, I guess, he kind of was. My cousin held up his hands. So, we're good, right? I took a step closer, lowering my voice. I never want to see you again. You understand? He nodded quickly. Yeah, man. Got it. I smiled. Good. Then I turned and walked away. This mess wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Back at my parents' house, the atmosphere was completely different. Gone was the smug superiority, the dismissiveness. Now they were just tired. Embarrassed. Grateful. They sat across from me at the dining table, the same table where they had probably signed that deal, with my cousin, thinking they were making the smartest financial move of their lives. The plastic bag full of cash sat between us. My mom sighed. Brian, we really messed up. I said nothing. My dad cleared his throat. We should have told you. We should have thought it through. You shouldn't have kicked me out, I said, leaning back. But you did. For him. My mom flinched. We were just... She hesitated. We were looking for some easy money. I scoffed. There's no such thing as easy money. They both fell silent. After a long pause, my mom whispered, We know that now. They apologized again. Multiple times. They thanked me for fixing their mess, for getting their money back. My dad even admitted that if it weren't for me, they probably wouldn't have seen a single dollar again. I still didn't want to forgive them. But at some point I sighed and muttered, Fine. They weren't good parents. But they were my parents. Then my mom hesitated before saying, You know, if you want, you could come back. I laughed. I actually laughed. Not a chance. They both looked a little surprised. Maybe they thought after everything, I'd just move back and like nothing happened. I found a new place, I said. I'm moving in a few days. My mom nodded slowly, like she wasn't sure how to feel about that. My dad scratched his neck. You need help moving your stuff? I almost said no, but then I figured, why not? So, for the first time in years, we did something normal together. They helped me pack. We carried boxes, loaded them into my car. It was weirdly peaceful. By the time we were done, things almost felt okay between us. Not perfect. Not even good. But okay. That was enough. A month later, my mom called me. You won't believe what your aunt just told me, she said. I already had a feeling. What did he do? He got arrested, she said, voice dripping with disbelief. He tried to rob a jewelry store. I nearly dropped my phone laughing. Yeah, my mom sighed. Guess he thought that was easy money too. I shook my head. Some people never learn. And for once, I was just glad it wasn't my problem anymore.